All right, so hi everyone, and welcome to our session, which is called Institutionalization Repackaged. My name is Shelley Petit, and I'm just going to pull up our PowerPoint for you folks here.
I went through the test, and I should be on
now. We're presenting.
Okay.
All right, so let me just hide this. So this is called Repackaged of Institutionalization, the Past, Present, Future of Disability Housing. Your presenters will be myself, Shelley Petit. I'm from New Brunswick. We have Shelley Caldwell from Ontario, Amenta from Ontario, Tracy Odell. I'm not sure if she got on with us or not. She is, if not, we'll cover her part for us. She's from Ontario. And we have Maddy from Ontario. So me from the Maritimes and everyone else. Today's, we're going to do a quick welcome and land acknowledgement, and then we're going to go through the history of housing for persons with disabilities. So we're going to quickly cover a little bit of the first 100 years, asylums, hospitals, and institutions. I know it sounds like fun. Then we're going to do the age of experimentation and enlightenment from 1970 to 2000. Then we're going to look at 2000, how disability poverty can begin at birth, followed by the lived experience, chasing the unicorn, igniting change, seeking justice for seniors, and then we'll have time for questions and answers and a call to action. So I'm just going to start you off quickly with the land acknowledgement, where we do want to acknowledge that we are all gathering virtually on the lovely lands of Turtle Island that were never given to us. They were taken in an unceded manner, and we are forever thankful for the ability to continue to gather and use these beautiful lands, and we are sorry for the damage that colonialization has done to your gorgeous lands. This first PowerPoint here, this first image sums up what many of us with disabilities face on a regular basis. So we get the promise from the government, welcome to your long-awaited, fully accessible new home, only to be shot through the false door and back to the compulsory residential living units for disabled. In Canada, there are over 6.2 million people with disabilities. The newest numbers just came out, and I did not have time to update this. And we've risen up to over 27% of Canadians with one or more disability. But these are the numbers from 2017, and at that point, 450,000 Canadians with physical disabilities reported being unable to access accessibility features in their homes, and 950,000 Canadians with disabilities were found to be in core housing needs. And what's really important with these numbers is that this is before the housing crisis started. I can't even imagine what the numbers are going to be as the new stats come out. So asylums, hospitals, and institutions. For those in the Ontario region, or even well-versed in disability stuff, you've probably heard of David Lepotsky, and he has told us that there are two kinds of people in society: those who have a disability now, and those with disabilities in waiting. So it's urgent. Let's make sure that accessible housing is available to all, because we're all going to need it at some point. In the 20th century, we saw housing changes for people with disabilities, and it was fostered. We had segregation that was fostered through industrialization. So as towns and cities were becoming busier and busier, we were being pushed to the outskirts, or especially if you had a child with a disability, they were being pushed to the outskirts. We got this continued reliance on the medical system. So the medical system would tell us there is something wrong with those people, and we would, again, try to isolate them from the rest of society. We saw the opening of public institutions like psychiatric hospitals, homes for the blind, and the goal of those was out of sight, out of mind. Then World War I and World War II, the wars to end all wars, that never ended all wars, came about. And from those, we, at both eras, so back in 1919 and again in 1945, all of a sudden we had so many young men and a few women, but mostly men coming back from war with very severe injuries. And at that time, we primarily recognized physical injuries, but there were the injuries there. And these injuries started to foster this notion that we have to do something about it. Unfortunately, at that time, it was really only the notion of fostering or creating housing and jobs and things for veterans with disabilities. There still wasn't quite that notion that we should do the same thing for people in general society with a disability. But veterans did start to bring forth this type of advocacy, is where we get groups like the war amps. In the states where they are significantly advanced in terms of regulations through the ADA, we know that the ADA fostered so much change from Vietnam, returning from Vietnam. And although I'm happy that Canada did not fight in Vietnam as full participants, I do have to wonder, would we be more advanced in our regulations if we had? Because unfortunately, we would have seen so many men coming back with, again, more serious injuries. At this time, we were often referred to as unfit, regardless of the disability, and the goal of housing was to get us out of the way. These presentations are going to be available afterwards. I'm not going to give you all these dates, but just a few to show you how poorly society treated people with disabilities. In 1897, Nova Scotia opened up feeble-minded institutions. In 1918, they started to sterilize the unfit, in other words, anyone with a disability, and sterilize without your knowledge, without your consent. In 1935, they kindly put together the Society for Crippled Civilians. 1937 is when more knowledge started coming out about how bad the sterilization without knowledge was occurring. In 1940, on a positive, we saw the Canadian Hearing Society founded. And this was the first time that they were saying, okay, general society have these disabilities as well, and we need to do better. Unfortunately, they followed that up in 1958 with the creation of a society for retarded children. And thank goodness we have learned better and we've learned to change our language. It took until 1986 for the Supreme Court of Canada to affirm that it is illegal to sterilize without consent. But don't get me wrong, they still sterilize with consent, and they sterilize by convincing people to consent. Starting in the 1960s, which we'll talk about shortly, they started to fight to deinstitutionalize by not-for-profits in society, but that also led to in the 1970s and 1980s, the beginning of the disability industrial complex. A few other big things that happened. 1850, the Provincial Lunatic Asylum opened in Toronto. Then in 1876, we saw the Asylum for the Idiots and Feeble-Minded opening in Ontario as well, under the name Huronia. And one of the things that many Canadians, and I guess many across the world, don't realize is that when we talk about the terrible number of unmarked graves that we're hearing about at many of these places, including Huronia, a lot, not in all places, but Huronia and a few others, many of those graves were also children with disabilities because they were being sent to the same institutions to be out of sight and out of mind. Something Canada should be ashamed of themselves for. In 1910, the Immigration Act regulated who could enter Canada, and they had actual regulations like no idiots or feeble-minded people, no one with a loathsome or contagious disease, and no dumb, blind, or physically defective allowed. Oh, and we should still be ashamed because it hasn't changed much for the better. And that's something that everyone can call their member of parliament on and say, fix that now. I've left a few images for you in here with the asylum, the Huronia, the asylum in Toronto, and the first actual War Amps picture, which is the first real advocacy group toward acceptance of persons with disabilities. Tracy, are you here now? I'm going to take that as a no, so I'll just cover this. Tracy was going to talk to you about the age of experimentation. She is a lady in the Ontario region who unfortunately was forced to live through the age of experimentation. So this is as the 60s came about. And, thankfully it was no longer kosher to just take young children and shove them off into the distance and try to this out of sight, out of mind. But they had to start figuring out how are we going to do better for persons with disabilities. And we saw the beginning of participation houses, larger homes that they would house multiple people with disabilities. The large community under Jean Vanier started opening homes that were more developed for persons with intellectual disabilities. There were smaller group homes and supportive housing. There was all kinds. We also saw residential schools for the blind, the deafblind, and those with learning disabilities. They also had what was called satellite apartments. So these was the opening of small apartments where you would have 3 or 4 units and then a worker within them. And they were just trying different things to see what would work best to help people with disabilities live with more independence. When she was going into her teens, Tracy, because she was in a wheelchair, both her and her sister and their parents were in an apartment and didn't really have the ability. We didn't have the technology or the accommodations that we have now. They, like many others, had to go live in a hospital. Can you imagine as a parent having to take your child and say, okay, well, I have to give you up and put you to live in a hospital? And so we claim we've done better. We claim that we don't do that anymore. And we've developed these types of homes, like the large community homes and the smaller group homes. And yes, some of these exist. But sadly, many of them are still what we're calling institutionalization repackaged. It's just institutionalization by another name. During the age of autonomy, we saw new purpose-built integrated housing with some shared services. And she's left you the name of multiple different groups. Most of these were in Ontario, but there were versions of them all over Canada. And it was this idea that you could live in your home and have help come in to help you live a more independent and accessible life. But often, as it still is today, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. So if you were not really good at advocating, or your parents at advocating to get you some of these systems, it was a struggle to live at home with some independence. There's also a bit of a focus on sensitive housing right now, what they call. So for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who disproportionately experience homelessness. They're also looking at some long-term care homes in First Nations communities, supportive housing for Indigenous persons with various disabilities, as well as for others at risk of homelessness. So mental health is often overlooked, and it took the huge damages of the pandemic for mental health to be really be looked at for how disabling it can be. There's the concept of mini homes that are opening in the Hamilton area and various places across Canada, even like the 12 community homes. And these are smaller homes that are giving that independence back to people, because it's that having a home not only, again, protects you from the environment, but it also gives you that sense of pride and that sense of independence and that sense of, I can do this. And that is hugely important for what some of us have faced. And it makes a difference. There are too many people that are finding themselves unhoused right now because of people gobbling up the housing market or taking the accessible units out of play because they can financially afford to do that, and leaving people who need them with no housing, or housing that you're stuck in because you can't get out because of a wheelchair, walker, vision impairment. It's gotten so bad that in Ontario, at the Mount Sinai Hospital, they've actually taken and developed a part of the hospital and to make 60 to 80 units to help get people off the streets. We shouldn't have to do this in Canada. Housing should be available to all, regardless of your age and regardless of whether you have a disability. So that's the history of housing up to this point. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sherry, who's going to talk to you folks about the next part.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry Caldwell. I'm an advocate for accessibility and inclusion. I'm a mother to 4 children. My only daughter, Ashley, lives with a rare genetic condition. So that's her as an infant there on the top of the slide. She inspires my fight for a society where housing is not a barrier, but a foundation for those with disabilities. Ashley, she loves fashion and art, and she's sitting here beside me. She might pipe in. She also uses a wheelchair and a walker, and we live in a 2-story home. So she's actually 18 years old now, but I have to carry her up and down the stairs often. So in Canada, the intersection of disability and housing is a critical issue. Our building codes fall short, wherein families like mine to find accessible homes. As we know, disability poverty often begins at birth. The right to adequate, affordable, and accessible housing is just not a need, it's a human right. Yet it simply is pretty unattainable as it just doesn't exist anywhere in Canada. And so the next slide, thank you, Shelley. Our international commitment. So 32 years ago, Canada pledged to uphold the rights of children, including those with disabilities, by ratifying the conventions of the rights of the child. We must honor these commitments. It's now 2023, so over 30 years later, and especially ensuring accessible housing for all, it is a justice and a human rights issue. So the next slide. There's many federal barriers in public policy. So according to Articles 2 and Articles 3 in the Child Rights Convention, our government has a responsibility to protect and support children with disabilities and not discriminate. However, in Canada, lifetime caregivers and children with severe disabilities find themselves consistently excluded from federal policies and programs. Lifetime caregivers were left out by design from EI benefits, CERB benefits, and CPP programs. Even as recent as last year, policymakers are still excluding children with disabilities to this day. So last year in 2022 in the federal budget, they launched a refundable multi-generational house renovation tax credit of $7,500. However, with this new credit, they made a point of excluding families who need to make accessibility modifications earlier in their children's lives to prepare for supporting them at home and into adulthood. So tax credits for accessibility, such as this one, the multi-generational home renovation tax credit, must include families of children with disabilities. As you might realize, children grow quite quickly and they get heavy, and waiting until they're 18 to make our homes accessible is not an option. So next slide. Thank you. We must create family-centric housing policies. Our governments must shift the focus from institutionalizations towards supporting families. Every child, like Article 9 of the Convention of Rights states, has the right to be cared for by their parents in the family home environment, not in institutions of any form. However, currently, our provincial governments across Canada prefer to support group homes or foster homes for children with developmental disabilities, while simultaneously neglecting to invest in home care, accessible housing, and critically needed financial supports for caregivers. So next slide. Federal policies often overlook the unique housing needs of families with disabled children. From the lack of both accessible housing options and lack of essential financial barriers for lifetime caregivers, our systems are failing to protect those vulnerable families. The media is full of stories. As you can see here on my slide, all these headlines show families forced into heartbreaking decisions due to inadequate housing and lack of essential health supports, such as home care. In British Columbia, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and from coast to coast, parents face painful, gut-wrenching dilemmas of institutionalizing their children to access essential health supports, a clear failure of our federal and provincial housing and disability policies. These headlines speak for themselves. They're shameful and they're not reflective of Canadian values. So on the next slide. So we do have some hope. We have to be hopeful in all this. And Nova Scotia's landmark legal victory last June of this year has a 5-year plan to move individuals out of institutions. It gives us hope for the future. And this approach must be a nationwide model, ensuring accessible housing for all ages and abilities. We must never force institutionalization or foster care on our children. Okay, on the next slide, thank you, Shelley. Lifetime caregiving funding program is essential. It's a necessity. We know it takes 2 incomes to survive in Canada, to pay mortgages, rent, to put food on the table, not to mention like the extraordinary cost of raising a child with a disability. We need to recognize and value the role of the lifetime caregivers and ease the financial burdens placed on them, thereby making housing more secure for families. Next slide. We need to enhance the child disability benefit. The current child disability benefit does not lift families out of poverty, and it leaves them food and housing insecure. Tripling the child disability benefit and removing the income testing will significantly add in securing housing for families with disabled child. This also reduces the risk of institutionalization. So doubling the disability benefit was in Justin Trudeau's mandate letter to Minister Carla Quattro back in 2019. So it's now 2023. So he needs to act on that because this is a crisis. Okay, so the next slide, thank you. Accessibility grants for housing. Home modifications for accessibility are an absolute necessity for the safety and well-being of children with physical disabilities and their family caregivers. Unfortunately, these modifications are cost prohibitive for the vast majority of families. Many go without and are marginalized as a result. We must introduce housing and vehicle accessibility grants and incorporate universal design and building codes nationwide. This will ensure dignity and accessibility in homes for persons with disabilities. And the next slide. So according to Article 4, we need to make rights real. And that means our government needs to act. So let's transform our society in one that not only values diversity and inclusion in our words, but manifests these into actions and policies and programs, particularly in accessible housing and financial supports for families. Together, we can create a Canada where no child with a disability is deprived of the right to grow up with their mom and their dad in a secure and accessible home, surrounded by their family and their siblings. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, my name is Maddy. I'm non-binary and my pronouns are they, them. I'm an autistic adult and parent of 4 children who are also autistic. I'm also multiply disabled with vision challenges and have a spinal cord injury and use a wheelchair. We live in Carleton Place in rural Eastern Ontario, and I advocate with both provincial and federal governments for inclusion and acceptance of autistic individuals and for people with disabilities to have their own voice in policy decisions. And I have struggled with finding appropriate and accessible housing throughout my adult life. I feel agency is the most important consideration when it comes to considering how to solve the housing struggles that we, people with disabilities, face. Ensuring that we are part of and, where possible, guiding choices and decisions. And so often we have been set aside, and for many of us, decisions made for us, without us. Putting agency first guides us through all the other elements in determining housing options. And my lifetime journey as an adult and in conversation with countless other people with disability has made me realize that finding both accessible housing and affordable housing is akin to finding a unicorn. Every once in a while, I am told that one exists, but if indeed they do exist in Ontario, where I live, they are a very rare find. Next slide. In 2020, the poverty level in Canada was estimated to be about $2,300 a month. And we know from research and statistics that there are increased costs to being disabled. In fact, in Ontario, the current monthly amount for a single individual is approximately $1,300. This is legislated poverty. Provincial governments have the power and the funds to choose what they will prioritize their spending on. And every year, those choices do not include bringing those people with disabilities that they are responsible for out of poverty. And if our income is unstable, our housing is unstable. The 2 biggest things we need change to support autistics is first, better access to employment supports to find, obtain, and sustain employment. The other is to increase and improve disability support amounts. A large percentage of people with disability are on provincial disability support programs, and no province pays an income benefit above poverty. Provincial disability rates must increase. We eagerly look forward to the implementation of the federal Canada Disability Benefit at some point the next year or so, but we cannot afford to wait, and provincial governments need to act now. We need increased income to find these unicorns. Next slide. With market rents higher than most provincial disability support amounts, there is almost no available affordable housing for people who are in the situation where they need to look for new accommodations. So the choices are room with someone, which is precarious housing, homelessness or homeless shelters or temporary housing, which has significant safety risks, or wait for public geared to income housing. However, the wait list to access these public housing or geared to income supports is somewhere in the cases decades long. And in many municipalities, including my own, there are 0 accessible units. The unicorn can't be found here. We need to change this and change this quickly. Next slide. The problem of affordable and accessible housing is made even worse by 2 methods that is displacing thousands of people with disabilities. We know that if a tenant loses their housing right now, they will be faced with significant increases in rent to find another home near where they live. All people are experiencing this experiencing this difficulty. But for those on fixed incomes, and especially those on provincial disability programs, the challenge is dire. And more of us are on this housing ledge because of rent evictions, where a landlord evicts a tenant so that they can renovate the unit to hopefully rent it at a significantly higher rent. And sell evictions, where the landlord sells to a new owner who wishes to move in to the former rental unit, thereby displacing the current tenants. We have seen the number of cell evictions especially explode over the last few years during COVID as more and more families wanted to buy new houses but get out of bid and therefore look for resale housing in the community of their desires. Landlords who, due to rent controls, cannot raise rent higher see the sale of their home as a significantly higher value as a way to get their tenant out and see more money now. We are losing rental housing, we're losing affordable housing, and the gaps are increasing. And if one of these is accessible, we are losing one of those rare unicorns. Next slide. I was in the situation for these last 3 years. In the middle of this pandemic, and a few months after I was in a car accident that permanently changed my life and added many more intersections of disability to me and my family. Our previous owner sought to sell the house instead of dealing with the many severe maintenance issues and dealing with us as tenants. And we've spent the last 3 years fighting for compensation and to avoid being evicted through the Landlord Tenant Board. And over these 3 years, we kept looking for affordable options to move to, but every place was going to cost around $1,000 more per month, which we could not afford. And all but 2 of these were accessible. At the end of this 3-year process, we were provided compensation, but we were also evicted. We had 2 months to look, and we looked, and we looked. And again, out of all those places, only one place was accessible, but it was over $1,000 more per month than we were paying. We applied, we were rejected, and so we looked more and more. And with 1 week to go, we met with the county housing supports who were trying to first find temporary place for us, which was made more difficult because of lack of accessible options. It was stressful. But finally, with 2 days remaining, we found an affordable house that wasn't accessible. But the landlord agreed to build a ramp and do as much as we could to make it somewhat accessible. So we moved in here, and the other options were too scary. And so it's difficult and painful to live here. But this is where we're at right now. We still need to find the unicorn. Next slide. The first barrier that we have to overcome is the biggest barrier, attitude. What I've experienced in my life as an advocate is that once we can change the attitude of the people who are serving us, see the stories, and become allies to us, we see the other barriers easy to knock down one by one. We need to build a culture of accommodation where we start with inclusion and we seek out barriers to remove. And the next big step and solution is adopting universal design in everything, everywhere. We need to build inclusion from the start where the cost of adopting it is negligible, but the impact is exponential. Not just for those who are visibly disabled, but for those who have hidden disabilities or those who have not declared their disability. And again, each one of us faces an increasing expectation that we will have some period of disability in our lives, so why not be prepared for our family, friends, and ourselves now? Ensure that our wraparound supports to go alongside accessible and affordable housing, and above all, require and enshrine the concept of agency in our ability to make decisions as to where we live. We are in a crisis now. Let's start now to do everything we can to reverse this and provide a world where all people with disabilities can thrive. Thank you.
Hi, Shelley. Sorry to interrupt you, all of you. Shelley, you are muted. I had to mute you because there was a lot of sound coming back, so you have to unmute yourself. It should be at the very bottom of the screen. There's like a little.
There we go. There. Sorry about that. Yeah, I started coughing. I'm sorry. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sal. I'm going to mute myself. Give me a sec, Sal, to pull it back up to the screen, okay?
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for understanding. I just had to unmute mute a couple people just due to background noise. All right, I'll disappear again.
Sal, are you going to talk?
Are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go. It's up on the screen
Okay.
for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sal Amenta, and I live in Ontario, Canada. My town of Stouffville is on the land of the Huron-Wendat, where the Jean-Baptiste Launay site thrived 500 years ago. With over 50 log houses, it had a population the size of a European town at the time. As settlers, we thanked them for welcoming us by taking their lands for ourselves. So today, I'm one of countless Europeans who settled on their land from all over the world. And I, for one, am deeply divided, sorry for what our predecessors did, and grateful for the Indigenous people's hospitality. But I will not stop there. As an immigrant myself, I expect climate change to turn much of humanity into climate refugees in search of new places to take root. So I'd like to share my immigrant's dream. A future in which everyone is a global citizen, free to move from one place to another in search of a place to call home. A world without borders and barriers. But today, many boomers like me, nearing 80 with a variety of ailments, are living a nightmare. Over 90% of us say we want to age at home with the supports we need in neighborhoods we love. But this becomes impossible when we can no longer climb steps 2 at a time or jump in and out of bathtubs. We're no longer at home where we live. And while some of us own our homes, many of us can't afford costly renovations or moving into expensive retirement homes. And we absolutely dread going to old folks' homes where thousands died during the pandemic. We want our home to remain accessible as we age, a place to go to belong with family and friends where we can live a full and active life. So what's our government doing for us? Whether we like it or not, ours is herding us into old age homes because it considers us to be bed blockers in hospitals. It's necessary, our government says, to end hallway medicine and shorten wait lists. Of course, it hasn't done either. Instead of forcing us, our parents, aunts, and uncles, to choose between costly renovation and institutionalization, why isn't our government providing us with the accessible housing we need and want? The short answer is they can't, because it doesn't exist. Almost all housing is designed for and built for able-bodied Canadians. What can we do about it? We can make sure that all new homes are fitted with universal design, which aims to provide housing for people of all ages and abilities. We can demand its adoption into the National Building Code so that all other codes follow suit. Universal design is surely the key to providing accessible housing for all, especially seniors and people with disabilities. Cost should be no excuse. In Canada, for example, according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, building accessible apartments and condos costs nothing if builders start at the blueprint stage and change the way they build homes. Unfortunately, the housing industry isn't buying into this, even though the 2016 StatsCan census found that 3/4 of Canadians 65 and over are homeowners. This means that the average home value of $750,000 in Canada, seniors have trillions of dollars in equity at their disposal. Yet builders and developers continue to ignore this huge seniors market. Is it too much to ask for accessible and affordable housing for our seniors and people with disabilities? Not if we want to honor their rights. We have laws at all levels which prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities and supersede all other laws and building codes. Yet the industry routinely contravenes rights legislation. And the worst part is we're tolerating it. Let's be clear. Social justice demands respecting the wishes of persons with disabilities and seniors who have built the country we love. Therefore, we must honor their right to housing by providing them with the accessible housing they desperately need. But to do so, we must ignite change in home construction using universal design. Okay, our task is to persuade the housing industry to begin supplying the accessible housing vulnerable Canadians desperately need. A new stock of accessible housing to benefit not just today's aging population, but tomorrow's generations who may wish to age in place as well. So let's light a fire under our policymakers and politicians. Let's get them to adopt universal design as the standard for housing, just as we now enjoy flush toilets. Let's persuade them to put universal design into our national building codes. It is the key to social justice for Canadians of all ages and abilities. And finally, let's gently remind everyone that they too will grow old if they don't die young. Thank you for your patience and attention.
And that's the presentation. We do have one slide with a call to action, but it's very simple. We're asking everyone at the end of this, take 5 minutes of your day, someday this week, and call your government officials, municipal, provincial, federal, or wherever you live, if it's state, government, federal, and say, universal design is necessary. We know that it works for everyone. It works for persons with disabilities. It works for parents of children with disabilities. It works for our veterans who deserve our respect for what they've done. It works for able-bodied people. And even more than all that, it works for our parents. And as a person trying to take care of their mom right now after a stroke, let me tell you, it is not fun. It is not easy. I cannot carry my mom up and down stairs. Sherry should not have to carry her daughter up and down stairs. Heather should not have to carry Justice up and down stairs. We can do better. This is Canada. And not we have to do better. But here's the thing. Down the line, we're all going to need that. So let's just make it accessible now, because you waiting until you need it is too late. And I ask every person on this right now to look around your place and say, maybe you don't need accessible housing today, but what if you were in a car accident tonight and you needed to use a wheelchair for 2 months? Could you maneuver around your apartment or your house? Many people cannot. Australia has already made this the law. All housing in Australia is now universal design. Even if you're building a house, your own house, your main floor has to be universal. And here's why. So that if something were to happen and you need that, you can still maneuver. There's a washroom, there's your kitchen, there's a bathroom on the main floor that is universal. Your apartments, as we tell developers here in New Brunswick, I'm in New Brunswick, I can guarantee you at the rate they're putting up housing today, in 20 years, 15 years, we're going to have a glutton of houses again. We're going to have too many units. Do you want to guarantee you're going to be able to rent your unit? I can tell you how. Make sure it's universally designed. Then anyone can live there. You don't have to hold it aside in case we have someone with a wheelchair or someone who's got a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. This has to become the law. Ireland is also changing that. If Australia and Ireland can do it, anyone can do it. And at this point, someone said in places. Yeah, so we're going to open it up to questions now. So we're asking you to please make this call, but we're going to open it up for chats or questions. So if you have a question, you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to ask to unmute, we can unmute you and we can have a discussion, because we still have, another 20, 30 minutes here. So if someone would like to ask a question or participate in the conversation, please. This is how we learn from one another. Someone was asking, though, is if universal design where it's law, is it retrofitted? Do they go back? No, it's on new designs going forward. It is very expensive to retrofit. And that's what we try to tell the government and developers, that trying to retrofit is expensive. And that's, whenever you use that word, accommodations, accessibility, everyone goes, oh, money, money, money. But if we do it right from the get-go in the planning stage, it's not any more expensive. Actually, it's cheaper for developers, because all your doorways and your hallways are wider. So they have less 2x4s for strapping. And it's probably not a huge saving per building, but we know these guys. Saving $1 an apartment is a big deal for them, and they'll do it. They'll do it to save 50 cents. So it's still so much better, and it makes it so much more accessible for everyone. Yeah. In New Brunswick, where I live, you can get up to $15,000 to help with accessibility. That won't even give you an accessible washroom, let alone if you need an accessible washroom and a ramp. And then what they try to do is get you to take used stuff through. In New Brunswick, the Easter Seals provides equipment. They want you to take used stuff. That's no good. We tell our members all the time at the coalition to not do that, because it no sooner is put into your house, it breaks. And then you are responsible for all the modifications and repairs. So we get $860 a month to live off of in New Brunswick. If you're on the disability benefit, you can't afford to live off that, let alone do any repairs. So it becomes very expensive, very difficult. So is there anyone that has a question, comment, would like to share something? Even members of the panel, please add to it. This is not just me. Oh, Carrie McCacken brings up a very good point. So intergenerational, diverse, multi-purpose housing. Yes. One thing that's really important, and we see the odd time people talking about it, we can never allow the government to go back in building, here's the accessible apartment. And then they're going to turn around and say, so every unit here is just going to be for people with disabilities. And then down the road, we're going to have a building just for low income. And then it all has to be mixed housing. When we allowed them in the past, they would have these, the social development housing, the government housing. That housing all became neglected and not well covered, not well protected by police. And everyone just said, oh, well, that's just for those people on assistance. No, mixed housing that they could even have a housing for people that work where both parents work. We see so many people in New Brunswick that are living in tents where both adults are working and they just can't make enough money to cover the rent, and have that housing unit based off. You show your stubs and you pay a max of 30% of your income to cover the rent so that you can live a life that benefits everyone. You're healthier, so you don't need to go to the hospital as much. You have money to spend in society to employ other people. It's a no-brainer. I guess that's why government doesn't do it.
One of the things I think that we tend to misuse a word of inclusion. Inclusion doesn't mean that people with disabilities are there. That's integration. Inclusion is where we're fully supported and where everybody's needs are met together. And yeah, when we're building, I think that we need to work with developers to start building this concept of inclusion from the start. Start with universal design. We also need to really work on co-op housing. We need to find ways to we have two things we need to do to get affordable housing, to be able to afford housing: higher incomes or lower rents, or somewhere in between. And so we need to find all of the ways to do that. But none of that is great unless you're also making things accessible. through this whole process.
Yes, very much so, Maddy. You covered that perfectly. We need all that. And here's the thing. I hope that as Canadians, we've learned in the last 4 or 5 years that it only takes one small event. Look at how many people, I mean, the pandemic was not small, don't get me wrong, but the pandemic put so many people teetering near that edge. And then one other small event. If you work a lower paying job that doesn't have paid sick time and you get COVID right now and you have to go a week unpaid, for many families, you lose housing. It was cold. I don't know about the rest of Canada. We get about 10 centimeters of snow here in New Brunswick. We were lucky. It was supposed to be 20, so I'll take 10. But I couldn't have imagined being in a tent last night in that. No one should have to be in a tent in that. Now, can you imagine waking up in a tent and you need a CPAP machine to breathe at night, or you need to plug in your chair, your power chair, or, you expect to be treated with dignity and like a human being because you're a Canadian? I'm tired of seeing seniors living in tents because their CPP is not enough. It is not cool. This is not the Canada that I grew up in and was taught that this is our Canada. We're better than this, and we need to start leading the way. And anyone that's on this, come join us at the Accessible Housing Network. We need advocates all across the country, and we work together to share ideas and to approach the government, because our voice, we are the single largest demographic in Canada, persons with disabilities. Then you add in the seniors who also have many of the same needs. And we can control that government, and we can make them do this if we work together. We have the strength, we have the power, we have the numbers. Come join us. We're on all social media. Come find us, come join us. We would love to have you with us. We won't work you too hard, I promise. Well, maybe, but
Shelley, put some of the links to the Accessible Housing Network.
I will. I'm going to go grab them right now. Yeah.
I wanted to share just that in my presentation, I talked a lot about income supports, but income supports ensure that you have housing, rent, and mortgages paid. And families online that I'm seeing in some groups of caregivers are reporting this month that they have no money left after the rent. They're down to $24 or $100. And they have no idea how they're going to buy anything for Christmas. And if rent is increased, they are going to be unhoused. And that's when families are feeling so desperate that they're resorting to institutionalization or foster care, which is the other option that governments are telling these families. They will support a family to do foster care of a child with developmental disabilities and support them with $3,500 a month. They're doing that in New Brunswick and BC. So they are not ensuring that families have the means to stay housed and to raise their children. And it's shameful. But I will hopefully Tracy can share her story. She's lived that, so.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm here, but I was very dependent on the need for housing because I was in an institution for children with disabilities, and there was just no place to go when you left other than like a senior's home. So over time, like different models were being tried out, but always in a very small scale, like a little dot here on a map or a little dot there in a map. So there was nothing like systematic that was in place for housing. So that has been a real issue for folks, plus the fact of how do you find what is out there that is accessible. There's no central registry of housing stock that you can have. At first, I just was fine with a bachelor apartment that was accessible because it was accessible. That was fantastic. But as I, matured and grew and got married, had kids, etc., I gradually needed bigger and bigger places to live to accommodate the children. And now I'm in a house and have the support services I need, brought in. So sometimes for some people, housing is absolutely essential, but you also have to have the services, or else you can be in your apartment, but you can't get out of bed. You cannot even go to the bathroom, right? If you need help with something like that. So, that I wanted to go into a bit of detail on that earlier in my talk, and I'm sorry about my mix up with the time that's on me. But I'll just leave it there and keep listening to questions and try to answer some when I can. Thanks.
And just so everyone knows, the Accessible Housing Network. So we are just a group of advocates from across the country that have come together. There are seniors advocates, there are persons with disability advocates, all different various advocates, and we're working to talk to the governments about this on all levels. These guys, the folks in Ontario, have even done a great job, like at the municipal election for the Toronto mayor. They were actually able to get one of the mayoral candidates, although they did not win, to make a pledge for accessible housing. In New Brunswick, we have a provincial election coming up. We have a federal election coming up within the next, who knows what these guys, should be another year and a half, but it could be anything. We can start holding their feet to the fire by working on this. We can say, we do not want to see another penny of federal or provincial money put into housing that is not in universally designed housing, because that means that everyone can use it. And if we do that and we hold their feet to the fire, we can make a change that's going to benefit us today, but it's also going to make sure that in 20 years, we're not in the same mess again, because we need to learn our lessons from this one. And we need to make sure that life is better for us, but better for the next generation as well. That's always our goal, right? We always want it to be a bit better. I don't want my kids to go through any of this crap. I have a daughter with autism. My oldest child has severe endometriosis, and I can barely sit still today because mine is so bad. People need that stuff. And I look at my friends in wheelchairs, and it breaks my heart what some of them have to. They can't get in their kitchens because they're put into housing in New Brunswick that is considered accessible, but only if they have 40 hours of home care workers with them a week. What is the government spending per week, per month, right, to get 40 hours of home care at $25 an hour because they can't get into their kitchens, they can't get into their laundry room, they can't go to the bathroom, get to the toilet because there's not enough place to get their wheelchair in there, they need help to transfer, they can't get into the shower. Wouldn't it be cheaper to just make sure that there was universally designed accessible housing they could go into? So the first year they'd probably break even, and after that they'd be ahead. Ooh, what a thought, right? And then after we get housing, we move it to everything else. We want to see our schools universally designed so that all of our kids can go and participate. We want to see tourism universally designed because there is a huge market there. There are only 3 other countries in the world with accessible tourism departments, and they are coining it because it's the only place where you can go on vacation. It's Australia, Ireland, and the UK. And they are making something like 35% return on investment per year. Think if we could get our government to think that way and think of not just how it benefits Canadians every day, but how we can get other people to come and spend money here to keep the rest of us employed and to keep our environment healthy and happy and accessible to all. And we could go back to being that proud Canada that everyone was envious of 20, 30 years ago. Yes. Parveen just put something that is like, I hope I said your name correctly, Parveen, near and dear to my heart. She said, they said that true inclusivity needs to be led by the people who are being directly impacted by our laws and policies. And this is so true. We do not need to be told what we need. I'm tired of that. We do not need to be told by able-bodied people say, oh, yes, I understand. No, you don't. I don't care how much you want to try to empathize. You cannot live it. And as a mom who had a child with autism, and I thought I understood, and as a teacher trying to teach empathy to my students, I thought I understood. And when I became disabled and unable to leave my house because of my disability, I realized I didn't have 2 clues. As much as I wanted to try and do it right, I didn't have 2 clues. And so I think it's really important that the government starts enabling, not enabling in a bad way, but opening up positions so that more and more people with disabilities can be sitting in these committees, can be helping to lead these discussions and helping to lead these laws, because that's when things are going to change for the better. And that would include us. That would include making sure there's seniors on it. It would include making sure that there are young people with disabilities saying what they need down the line into the future. Yes. And earlier today, I spoke to on the topic of the disability industrial complex, because it goes hand in hand with this. It's when we have people who really make a living off of kinda pretending, sorta making things a little bit better, but in the long run, ensuring that they always have a job. And the goal of any disability group should be to work itself out of its need very, very quickly. And if that's not your goal, then there's something going on there that we need to look at. So, as Kate said, could it be that politicians prefer to jail us in nursing homes so their buddies make huge profits? Bingo! And we need to change that. We need to change it so that we are controlling the narrative and we are telling them what we need, and they are saying, oh, quick, how quickly can we get that done for you? Not quick in a bad way, quick as in convenient, but well built. So anyways, I would like someone else to speak so I don't have to.
I keep throwing my thoughts out in the
Yes.
chat, but yeah, one of the things I put down in the chat that I just sort of want to elaborate a little bit more on, though, is accessible and affordable housing doesn't stop when you get the key. It's everything after that as well. I mean, in order for those of us with disabilities to sustain ourselves in a house, we do need to make sure there's wraparound supports. We do need to make sure there's access to home care and nursing care and PSWs that are able to work in the area. It's ensuring that there is accessible transit in the area so that we have the ability to be included in the community that we're in as well, and that we remove those barriers. So it's not just about getting to the door. It's not just about being able to move around our house. It's being able to live and thrive there in the community. And I mentioned this when I spoke. The whole concept of agency, being able to be part of the decisions making and ability to choose where and how we live, and make sure that we have the supports to do that. You're muted, Shelley.
Yeah, we had someone from the audience who's come to speak to us. Now, she's my partner in crime. I know her well, but this is Mariette.
Hi, everyone. I'm Muriel. I'm from NBCPD, the other group that Shelley so generously shares her time with. She works very hard on these 2 groups. I just wanted to add, I don't know if Maddy, if you went through, I think we went through something similar. I was renovated because my a long-time landlord, I lived there 20 years, and it was my home. It felt like my home. It was my home, and he sold, and then I was in the same situation. I had to find something else, and when I found something, it wasn't totally wheelchair accessible to the liking of social development. So then I had to get an OT to sign papers to tell them, oh, yes, Muriel will be able to do okay in this apartment. Did you have to go through this too?
No, I was on my own. Trying to navigate this has been extremely difficult.
Oh no,
Before the
so
Yeah,
no.
before the pandemic, I wasn't in a wheelchair. I had the car accident right towards the beginning
Oh my goodness, I'm
of the
so
thing.
sorry.
So before that, my needs were different. I had a lot of sensory based needs, and I had, I couldn't live in places where there were a lot of external noises. That was challenging. But now mobility as well as vision issues are my challenge. And for me, the end decision was either I go into something that's almost affordable,
Mhm,
or I go on the street, or get into a temporary hotel, which even those ones weren't really accessible. So
mhm.
even though this place isn't that accessible and I have to deal with the pain of living here, I'm not on the street.
Better than the street.
And so I'm hoping that this is a temporary place. He's a great landlord, awesome landlord, love him to
Yeah,
bits.
it
But
sounds.
I need to find that unicorn. I need to find that place where I'm not in pain just for living here.
Hmm. And the thing with me is where because I had a red subsidy, which don't get me wrong, thank the good Lord, because I would
Hmm.
be on the street. There's no way in New Brunswick that you can afford an apartment if it's not a subsidized on. I am one of the fortunate ones where I've worked. I have benefits from my ex-employer plus my disability CPP. So compared to those who are trying to live on 800 something, I
Hmm.
mean, I do pretty well, but I could still not afford an apartment. And then because this place was not totally accessible, they had me pretty much sign papers that would say, "Oh yes, yes, even though this is not
Yeah.
accessible, I promise I'll be okay." So now, yeah,
Yeah.
it's they really like. So
Yeah.
now I am after it. It's different signing a paper with an OT when you're
Yeah.
thinking, okay, am I going to be on the street or
Yeah.
will I accept to live in an half accessible place? But now,
Yeah.
uh, after having lived here a year and a half, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful, beautiful apartment. But there are things that I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and I'm stuck here now. I signed the paper saying, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. This is great. It's totally accessible for me because I didn't want my rent subsidy to fall
Mhm.
between the cracks. I had no choice. I had
We
to
really,
for done."
yeah, we need to really push. We're put in an untenable position that it's in some cases life or death, life or risk of harm,
Mm-hmm.
um, because there are no other options. The lack of affordable housing is a primary challenge, and the lack of accessible housing just um, adds further. It's more than challenges. Like there are so many negative words, harsh words I'll use, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's really difficult, if not impossible, decisions that we have to make just to
Imagine there was a lady
be
that
housed.
that she could afford a condo. She's looking to
Yeah,
buy it. She can afford it, but she can't find it accessible. So
yeah,
imagine after that you have to, when you find one, wait on all the, if you do have the subsidy, to wait on all
hmm,
the red tape and
yeah,
everything else. I mean, you have no
You have no
chance of getting. I had to get to know a
yeah,
developer. I got to know
yes,
him
that's it.
before, you
Yeah,
know, like
Yeah.
the cart before the horse or whatever.
we need to push developers to see how easy this is to do, and how actually this is they will earn more by doing this.
Will
We
benefit.
need to push politicians to enshrine and enforce universal design into things. We should push the NDP to say, hey, liberals, in order to really support it, we this disability rights is essential, to move forward. And we need to push provinces and municipalities to in their own places, the
Yes.
things that they're responsible for building, enshrine universal design from the beginning.
Mhm.
Yep, right from the get-go. We even see it like it's all over. I've got a mom here in New Brunswick that their place flooded, right? The hot water heater upstairs blew, it flooded. You can jump on the tiles. This is like 2 months later in the kitchen, and water still squirts out. You can see the mold growing through the floor. And do you know what she was told from the rent tribunal? She has to now, so she's got a child with a very severe disability. She's at the point where she's starting already to go into the whole, she's preparing for his death, right? He's not going to have a whole lot longer to live, unfortunately. Mostly not because it's got a shortened lifespan with this disability, but because of the lack of care all through the years that he's not going to live. And she becomes very open and talks about it because she wants to make an example. She wants this to spur other on and force the governments hold their feet to the fire. And they've told her she has to go out and find her own contractor and have this contractor come in and deem the house unlivable. And she's like, yeah, sure, because I don't have enough money to get food this month, but I'll go out and do that, no problem. And she can't get respite care. She's been begging for respite care as a single mom for this child who needs 24-hour one-on-one, sometimes 2-on-1 supervision. And then they turned around. Finally, at first they approved it when I started working with her, helping her, saying, we'll approve it, but we only cover $20 an hour for respite care. And the care center charges $30. So you'll have to come up with that other $10 an hour. It took more than her full check to get the respite care hours. Yet the lady who lives across the street from me is one of these foster parents that they try to get people to give up their children to. And she'll take over, and she's not doing it to be malicious. She loves these kids and she wants to help out. And some of the kids she has, maybe they might be better that they're not with the parent in the situation they came from. But she gets 3 paid weeks of vacation time a year as a foster parent. And some of these parents can't get 2 hours a week of respite care. I can think of them lined up. We've got parents that have proof that their children are being restrained in the school system because they don't have the right way. They've never been trained on how to work with children with autism. They're restraining kids in our schools in Canada still. They're tying your child to a chair. They're locking them in rooms because they don't know how to work with these children, or they don't have the right setup in the school to do it. But yet these parents can't get a couple hours of respite care a week, but a foster parent that the government's trying to get you to relinquish your parental rights and turn them over is getting paid $3,000 a month. That, out of the system, out of the social development system, and has paid vacation time. And the amount of cars I see over there to cover off respite care nonstop if she wants to go out, if she's, if her shift starts 30 minutes before the child needs to leave for school. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I'm going, why can't we get a third of that for parents? What kind of a difference would it make, Sherry?
So in New Brunswick, your neighbor's receiving $3,500 a month.
Yeah.
And it was in the article, which I had the headline on my slide, and an additional $1,792 something for additional needs of equipment and things that they might need in rental. So, and they're doing the exact same program in BC, very well-funded program. And families in Ontario that I know, some families in Ontario, they're also in BC. 15% of them answered a government survey that had children with complex needs and said that they're seriously considering that they needed to give up their children to the government. So they are crying for help. And in Ontario, I personally have a very good friend advocating for her child to have 24-hour care because her child had seizures and oxygen and severe CP. The doctors were saying she needs a nurse at all times. And instead of saying, here's your home care supports, they said, we're going to bring in children's aid. Obviously, you can't care for her, and just place the child in a home. So that is just institutionalizing the child. The mother calls it medical kidnapping. And the child now lives in a home out of region, an hour away from her child. And it's the mother feels hopeless. There's no help to get her back because the mother doesn't have money to hire a lawyer. It's a bad system.
It's shameful. It really is. I even think of my mom. She gets care. She gets 7 hours a day. What do you do? Last time I looked, there were still 24 hours a day in New Brunswick. We have to wait 6 months because I can't care for her with my disability. My sister lives in Maine, so we have no choice. She's going to have to go, unfortunately, into a home, but we're ensuring it has the things that she needs. It's got a single room, which she wants, that has all the modern amenities. So she's okay with that stuff. But what are you supposed to do for the 6, 8, 10 months that you're waiting for a place? It's not like we didn't know that there were going to be a lot of seniors in society at this point, right? 10, 20 years ago, we knew the age of Canadians and we knew where they were going to go, right? That's just common sense. What did those governments do back then? Why were we not prepared? And it's
They don't use their
we got to
brains.
do better. We have to do better as Canadians. And that's only going to happen if we all stick together and we demand better. We have to. We have to stop dividing among us. We have to stop saying, well, seniors deserve more, or kids deserve more, or this type of disability deserves more. We just have to band together and say, all Canadians deserve a safe place to live. All Canadians deserve a livable income. All Canadians deserve the right to education. All Canadians deserve the right to food, to healthy food. And all Canadians deserve the right to earn an income. And if you have an illness or whatever that doesn't allow you that, then that is brought to you through the government. But if you can work, then it has to be made that you can work in a safe way. Not that you're forced to work or work a McJob or work in one of the, oh mon Dieu, j'ai oublié le mot là. When they pay you like $2 a week to work at Walmart.
Workshops?
A workshop, thank you. Sorry, the word is not coming to me. They need to have all these available, and seniors should not have to go work at Walmart as a greeter. If they want to, great, but not because they have to in order to be able to eat this month. That's just not cool. That's not what they built this country for.
I forgot that.
I guess, and the last thing too, I just wanted to mention quickly, because I think we're pretty much, it's just us yakking up here. If you want to watch something cool to give you some ideas too, and Kate's made reference to them, Kathleen Chung. If you've never watched the videos from the Raging Grannies, please go to YouTube and take a look. They are amazing. They've gone sometimes to Government House, or I believe that's what it's called, Ontario Government, and they do a crawl up. So basically, they take away their walkers and they try to crawl up the stairs to show government leaders what it's like when you don't have accessible units. They talk about jumping off. They'd rather jump from the Scarborough Cliffs like Thelma and Louise than have to go into some of these long-term nursing homes that took out a lot of people during COVID. And we have to look at some of this stuff and say, people are human beings. We are not numbers. We are not a number in your file. We are not a problem to deal with because we are seniors or we have a disability. Because in case you didn't know, in Canada, when you turn 65, your disability goes away. Boom, it's cured.
I can't wait.
Become a senior,
I'm
but you
looking
don't
forward
have
to it.
disability anymore. Me neither. I
I'm gonna
can't
start walking, and
You're gonna walk. I'm gonna be able to go outside. It's gonna be excellent.
you'd be like,
Wait,
fresh
and,
air.
Maddie's gonna start ziplining.
That's ziplining.
Wait, Maddie, do you know that there is an accessible zipline in Halifax that you can do in a wheelchair? It is made to go. It's a wheelchair-enabled zipline.
Those of us with spinal cord injuries, that would be the
So
exception.
yeah, that's still not a good idea,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
As fun as it might be.
Need to either snap my spinal cord in half.
Well,
One
at
way
least
to
you don't
go.
have fun. But yes,
So instead of the Scarborough, jumping off the Scarborough thing, this would be a fun way to go.
it would be, yes. Oh yeah, so yeah, there's actually, and it is something that we've been pushing here in New Brunswick, the coalition. We want to see tourism made way more accessible. All beaches in New Brunswick by the end of next year, I believe it is, except for one because of the way the tide comes in, We'll all now have the mat and
That
Moby chairs,
sounded
the
like
float
a
chairs.
joke.
There is
That-
one place where it can't, just because of the way the tide's made.
Mhm.
But they're working with engineers. They put it out as a challenge to different engineering students to see what we can do to do that. And we're really pushing them because they know that accessible tourism is a great way to go. So yeah. And anyways, this is, it would be, I would love to see Parveen come down and go zip lining down in Halifax, or things like that. And we should be able to get on a plane and travel safely and know that your chair is going to be there with you when you get off and working.
Oh, imagine that.
And we should be able to know if we go on vacation, there's going to be a hotel there that's accessible to us. And that we can take our child with the autism out to a restaurant and not worry. And I know it's utopia, but I believe in Canadians and I believe in us. And I know that people with disabilities, we're the majority of the population, and we know how to think outside the box. We know how to get stuff done. And if we really work at this together, we can make this happen. I honestly believe, and no one's going to make me not believe. I believe we can do this.
Maddy, been there, done that.
Yeah.
I was once almost knocked unconscious by a changing table in a wheelchair in the civil bathroom. Because
Friday. Yeah,
and
Friday.
they insisted on putting the change table in there.
Yeah, I've experienced that. On Friday, I was at a hotel, and the bathroom on the floor where our meeting was at had an accessible symbol, had a button. I opened I hit the button, and the door opened 2/3 of the way. Wouldn't open more. Got an attendant to come and look at it. She was able to push it just a little bit more, but it had a doorstop, so it couldn't open enough for an actual wheelchair to get through. So I was told, well, let's see if we can get somebody to look at it. Sorry. And sent me to the downstairs main floor, the lobby bathroom, which also had an accessible symbol but no button. Challenged to get in, challenged to do anything. There was really nothing accessible about it. And when I went out the door hit my wheelchair and crushed my arm, and I ended up having to get attended by ambulance because I couldn't move my arm for a while. This is the issue. Accessibility means something, and it means we need people, to when you're using the accessible symbol, that what it means and what is required from that. Mm-hmm. And it's we're just talking about mobility issues. There's issues with vision, there's issues with sound, there's issues with sensory. We need to, as a society, enshrine the concept of the culture of accommodation, the culture of accessibility in all of the things that we do. We're talking today about housing, but it's really every aspect of our lives. From the moment we step out of bed to the moment we get back into it, everything can affect our ability to be included in the world around us.
Yes.
We just need to have people that can take those barriers down and open doors for us. Literally.
Have you ever heard in a restaurant where you go and you call ahead and you're like, are you accessible? And they're like, oh, yes. We are. And you get there, there's 2 steps and they're, oh, well, it's accessible once you're in or once forward.
The word accessible is being taken over by too many people now, and it's being used for anything but. It's the same idea with DE&I. DE&I is being used by everyone now, and DE&I professionals, which is why I never use the term. It's always now IDEA, because we have to have that word accessibility there. 94% of employers that they've surveyed or something like that have forgotten all about persons with disabilities when they're talking about accessibility. And we need, Perrine said, it's become a little buzzword right now. And it's they're using it for all the wrong things. So maybe we need to come up with a new word. We'll think of something really cool.
Accessibility and availability are confused. That's the
Yes.
biggest challenge. People are using the wrong words. They're misusing it, and it continues and continues and continues. When they talk about accessible meetings, that means that people are available to attend. That's
Right.
not what accessibility means.
Nope, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you read what some people type on X? No wonder they can't spell their own name, let alone understand the difference between accessible and available and a few other things. So well, there, and there, and yeah. Anyhow, I do want to thank everyone who's come and stayed with us. And again, these aren't huge crowds, but it doesn't matter. We made great connections in our session earlier today. We are all disability advocates, because whether you have a disability today or there's one in your family, if not, tomorrow there will be. So we all need to work together to make Canada back to, this country that we were really proud of and that we know works with all Canadians. It doesn't matter who you are. Your country is not excluding you. It's including you in everything. And that's the way it should be in Canada, right? We were the mosaic. We weren't the melting pot. And we need to become that country again. And by doing that, people talk about how bad the hospitals are. No wonder the hospitals are so lined up. If we can't get care because we can't get into a doctor, by the time we get to the hospital, it is so far beyond that it's horrible. So we can all work together to thrive together and make sure that all of our families live their best lives as Canadians from cradle to grave. And that's what we need. And if everyone takes on calling one politician this week and saying, you know what? I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. I want to see truly accessible housing. Call Minister Fraser and say, listen, Sean, no more money unless it's universally designed. And just hold their feet to the fire. We can make a difference because they work for us. We don't work for them. They work for us. We pay their salaries and they need to listen to us. And again, everyone, please feel free to come join us at the Accessible Housing Network. Reach out to one of us. We'll give you the time of the next meeting. We'd love to have you there. The more we all know, the more we can affect change.